Hi there. Breaking news. So I'm just rushing this off as a quick update for Sunday night. I only just heard about this morning, but it's important enough I want to get it out immediately and drop when I'm doing a report on it. That reliable sources are saying that the Game of Thrones prequel series, House of the Dragon, has started its initial casting process. I say initial process because they're not announcing people they have cast. I'm saying that they've started sending out casting calls, that casting sheets are starting to be sent out to actor agencies, and that this will be a process lasting a couple of months. And that generally matches what we knew so far, that if they were going to be filming in 2021 like they said they wanted to, then they probably announced the first cast in December to January of this year. So this is about 6 months before when we'd expect such announcements to meet the filming date. Yeah, this is around when, half a year before that, the search for the main cast members is officially starting. People who are like a Tyrion scale or a Cersei scale or a Jon Snow scale character. And the reports also say that the first two that went out are the casting calls for the two main faction leaders, Rhaenyra Targaryen and her stepmother, Alicent Hightower. Now, we actually already found out a few weeks ago, they confirmed that House of the Dragon is about the Dance of the Dragons. But I didn't make a video at the time because I was waiting for something else to come out to justify making a big video on it. That Brian Cogman was the original writer on this, they said, but he had to leave to go to Amazon. So George R.R. Martin explained all this in a blog post. Cogman had to leave to work at Amazon, so they started over again from scratch with a new writer, Ryan Condal. But Martin said, "We're doing the same prequel era that I initially assigned to Brian Cogman, but we're starting over on it." Yet so many people get confused with like the Who's on First game of, oh, are they doing Brian Cogman's prequel anymore? Well, no, Brian isn't working on it. Oh, but no, it's the same era. Oh, so it is the same prequel. Brian Cogman will be working on it. And listen to me. It's like if Robert's Rebellion is a historical era, that you could fire your writers on a Robert's Rebellion prequel, hire new ones, and it's still the same prequel by new people about Robert's Rebellion. So this one was about the Dance of the Dragons. Cogman came out and said, that's what my pitch was. Martin said, we're doing the same thing Cogman was doing, so transitive property, it's on the dance. So these rumors are matching that they're doing that. And some people got a little confused because Martin put out this big anthology collection of different prequel novellas, hardbound as a hardcover, called Fire and Blood. But any one of those novellas was an entire prequel era unto itself. I mean, the whole thing, the whole giant 800-page book, covers 150 years worth of history and more than one potential TV show. It's like people weren't paying attention that Martin said when the book came out, 2 of the 5 potential prequel pitches sent to HBO are based on this book. That they never pitched the whole thing as an anthology with time skips like that. And if you've actually read it, it's like there's 2 big stories in it. The Targaryen conquest in the first half, and its aftermath, and then the Dance of the Dragons in its aftermath, which you can see this if you do the dance and its aftermath. It's like a 7 to 8 year TV show, which is great because the 2 eras, blur into each other as people who are teenagers at the start of the show become adults by 300 pages later. And I'm really excited about this. Like a lot of people reading the books and all the prequel stuff would say, Dance of the Dragons is the strongest idea for a prequel TV show. It's got 2 clear factions in it. It's got a lot of interesting dragon fights in it. There's 20 living dragons in it. And also the semi-official book fan site Westeros.org, who co-wrote that source book with Martin, they said, this is probably the best idea because it has the most source material. That in terms of words in print, the dance has about 60,000 words in it, versus the Targaryen conquest has only 10,000 words covering it. So in print and with actual dialogue and characterization, it's a more rounded out story than the conquest. So this is the most solid starting point versus, like Westeros.org was pointing out, the Long Night prequel that they had was a terrible idea. And they would know because they've worked with Martin. Martin never wanted to make a prequel set during the Long Night. It was never supposed to be developed like that. There's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't, because a lot of stuff didn't exist yet. And we really get the sense that HBO picked that because they wanted to cash in on White Walker hype, with no thought to, well, wait a minute, this is actually a really problematic idea for a prequel. And that's just based on what we do know. We've heard them changing all sorts of things with these weird rumors I'm not going to get into here. Things have been leaking out of, well, why did they cancel the pilot? You went to the trouble of making a pilot, and it was really bad. And we just keep hearing crazy rumor one after another. Some new ones just came out of what was wrong with it. But fundamentally, HBO tried to slap together their own TV show without any basis in Martin's world versus adapting one of his pre-existing prequel novellas. And this one is based on the biggest prequel novella on The Dance of the Dragons. And casting reports apparently just went out for Rhaenyra and Alicent. If you're not familiar with any of this, The Dance of the Dragons was a devastating civil war within two rival branches of House Targaryen. And it was the worst war in the history of Westeros up through Game of Thrones, because it's the only one in which both sides had dragons. That about 200 years ago, King Viserys I ascended the throne. And remember that Daenerys' brother in Season 1 was Viserys III? This is Viserys I. And he had one daughter with his wife, Aemma Arryn, who later died in childbirth to a son that didn't live more than a day, so he's left as a widower and with only one child, his daughter. So he started raising her to be his prospective heir. But a couple of years later, he remarried to Alicent Hightower, who went on to bear him 3 sons and a daughter, and the eldest of those sons was Aegon II, Rhaenyra's half-brother. So, during Viserys' 30-year reign, 2 rival factions developed at the royal court, one of Rhaenyra's followers and one following Alicent and her son Aegon II. And this eventually led to a succession war breaking out as soon as Viserys died, so the actual war starts 170 years before the War of the Five Kings in Game of Thrones, but it's a question of, well, would you start when Rhaenyra is a child, or do you start with the first bloodshed of the war, or do you show that in flashback? We'll get into that, but it's about 170 to 200 years before all of that. Now, if you're wondering if this is a rivalry for the throne between Rhaenyra and her younger half-brother Aegon II, why are the first 2 casting calls not for Rhaenyra and Aegon, but for Rhaenyra and Aegon's mother? Well, Alicent is really considered her faction's functional leader. Compare this to the Lannisters in the TV show. Who was the leader in King's Landing at the start of the war, like in Season 2? Would you say Joffrey was the leader? He was on the throne, but he was a puppet. His mother, Cersei, was much more of a mover and shaker than he was. It's somewhat like that Aegon II is older than Joffrey. He has children of his own. He's married. But Alicent and Aegon II are loosely like a sane version of Cersei and Joffrey. And sanity has its advantages. That makes them dangerous, that they're not, cartoonishly evil. It means they're not stupid and they're not cowardly, but they're scheming. So Rhaenyra and Alicent are really considered the faction leaders, to the point that the original prequel novella Martin wrote about the dance was titled The Princess and the Queen, referring to Princess Rhaenyra and her stepmother, Queen Alicent, are really seen as the 2 faction leaders. So Alicent's like the Cersei of this story, but she's ruthless to her enemies, but she's actually a nice person, and she's sane and stable, but she's trying to put her son on the throne above Rhaenyra. I say Alicent of House Hightower. Well, who are the Hightowers? They're the most powerful vassals of the Tyrells in the Reach. They're the family that rules Oldtown, the 2nd largest city in Westeros. And why do I have to explain this? The Game of Thrones TV show never mentioned them by name, which is a mistake, because they're actually pretty important in the books. And it's more important in the books. Mace Tyrell's wife, who just goes unmentioned. Is she dead or what? In the TV show, Mace Tyrell's wife is Alarie Hightower, meaning that Marjorie and Loras are both half Hightower and have Hightower cousins and political alliances. Tonally, the Hightowers are sort of like a more ruthless and scheming version of the Tyrells. They're not mustache-twirling villains, but they're politicians. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra is sort of like a female version of Stannis. Indeed, she's a direct ancestor of Stannis. His maternal grandmother was a Targaryen. And her issue is that her father raised her entire life, 30 years, treating her as the designated heir, as his eldest surviving child. She was expected to rule, but she's hit the glass ceiling that a lot of rulers in Westeros don't want to see a woman on the throne. That's the official line. Unofficially, you learn pretty quickly that this isn't about principle or women can't do this. It's politics. It's not like Alicent's followers are going, oh no, we want Aegon to rule ahead of his older sister because we believe in the law. They're trying to usurp the throne on a pretext. And that pretext, the way they cite it, does influence who follows them for what reason. Like, the Vale of Arryn is currently ruled by a woman, so she sides with Rhaenyra. Other inheritance issues and conflicts in the realm make people side with one or the other, depending on local politics. But the real bottom line is who can expect the most political favors from Rhaenyra or from Alicent more than any legal principle. But that's the pretext they cite of, oh, you're a woman, and the past 30 years that my father was openly making people swear oath to me as the heir to the throne in open court mean nothing to you. That you're pretending those don't exist. And I've been asked, why do I and a lot of other people hold up Rhaenyra as such a great character? Because she isn't a straw feminist Mary Sue. That this is not what it seems at first. Oh, it's about her struggling against the glass ceiling, but she's, through determination, good. Heck no. She's great because she's flawed. She's blunt and stubborn like Stannis. Because the whole thing is she was raised to rule, so she's confident in herself more than she is diplomatic. It's just, hey, I am the rightful monarch of Westeros. All who deny that are my foes. Deal with it. And she will not compromise in that sense. So she's not a Mary Sue. It's not some SJW thing. She's forceful. And some would say shrewish, but it's, well, is she doing anything a man wouldn't? Like if Robert Baratheon or Stannis did this, you'd think it was funny. Well, not funny, it's just that whole, she's a lady boss. Let me tell you what I want, but I'm a woman, so I have to say it in a nice way. That it's this whole weird thing for people around her that she doesn't act demure. Like the way Catelyn Stark has been raised as a southern lady at a southern court, that you have to act demure and polite and trade pleasantries, like the way Marjorie Tyrell talks, where the threats are hidden. She will openly threaten people, and people go, it's like, Tywin could get away with talking down to us like this. Stannis could say these things, but the fact that Rhaenyra is a woman makes it off-putting to some people. And it's a whole gender issue thing. Well, so she's great because she's flawed. She's a female version of Stannis who rides a dragon. And similarly, the Hightowers, they're gray. They're like this more ruthless version of the Tyrells. So this is wonderful because it isn't a black and white simplistic moral story of the struggle of the living versus the dead, or the honorable Starks versus the ruthless and evil Lannisters. No, think of this like Stannis Baratheon fighting Olenna Tyrell. Like those part of the books where he's versus the Tyrells where it's just politics. But there aren't designated heroes and villains. It's gray versus gray. And it's morally complicated and very interesting that way.